Behind me, Queen's Park, has been the centre of Ontario's government for more than 130 years. Inside these walls, governments have risen and fallen. Elections have been fought and won, and occasionally called earlier than expected. Tonight, as Ontario once again heads into an election called before it was legally required, we look back at the history of Ontario's government, the times premiers have taken a gamble by calling early elections, and what this moment means for the future of the province. Ontario's first election was held in 1867, the same year Canada became a country. The province's first premier, John Sandfield Macdonald, led a coalition of conservatives and moderate liberals governing at a time before formal political parties dominated the landscape. But even in those early years, elections were fiercely contested, and the decision of when to go to the polls has always been a matter of political strategy. By the late 19th and early 20th century, Ontario's elections had settled into a familiar rhythm. Governments typically served full terms before going back to the people for a fresh mandate. But as political parties became more organized, leaders began to realize that the timing of an election could be a powerful tool, one that could secure power for years or bring it to a sudden end. One of the first Ontario premiers to successfully use early elections as a political strategy was Mitchell Hepburn. Elected in 1934, Hepburn led the Liberals to a commanding victory during the depths of the Great Depression. 3 years later, he decided to call an early election. Why? Because his party was riding high in the polls, and the opposition was in complete disarray. It was a calculated move, and it worked. He won another majority. But not every early election is called for the same reason. In 1967, John Robarts, the progressive conservative premier, called an election a year early, not to gain a bigger majority, but to secure his legacy before retirement. His government had introduced major education reforms and infrastructure projects, and he wanted to go out on a high note. The result? Another PC majority. Sometimes, though, an early election can backfire. Perhaps the most famous case in Ontario's history was in 1990, when Premier David Peterson made what turned out to be a fatal miscalculation. Peterson had led the Ontario Liberals to a landslide victory in 1987, forming a majority government after working with the NDP in a confidence and supply agreement. But in 1990, just 3 years into his mandate, he saw an opportunity. The polls showed his party was still popular and an election wasn't required for another year. So he rolled the dice. He called an early election, confident Ontarians would give him another term. Instead, voters punished him for what they saw as political opportunism. The Liberals lost badly, and in a stunning upset, Bob Rae's NDP took power. The 1990 election reshaped Ontario's political landscape. The NDP, which had never formed a government in the province, suddenly found itself in charge during a global recession. Meanwhile, Peterson was forced to watch from the sidelines as his gamble cost him everything. The next decade saw even more political upheaval. After the NDP struggled with Ontario's economic downturn, voters turned to the Progressive Conservatives and Mike Harris in 1995. His government, focused on tax cuts and spending reductions, faced heated opposition but managed to win re-election in 1999. Unlike some of his predecessors, Harris waited the full 4 years before calling his second election. And that's the difference. Sometimes early elections work, and sometimes they don't. It all depends on timing, public sentiment, and the issues of the day. And that brings us to today. Doug Ford has now joined the ranks of premiers who have decided not to wait until the legally required date. His government is facing economic uncertainty with proposed U.S. tariffs threatening Ontario's manufacturing sector. By calling an early election, Ford is seeking a fresh mandate to tackle these challenges head-on. But will voters reward him for taking action, or will they see it as an unnecessary gamble? All of these political decisions, successful or not, have played out here at Queen's Park. This building has been the heart of Ontario's government since 1893, standing as a symbol of democracy in action. It has witnessed political triumphs and devastating defeats. It has seen majority governments and minority coalitions, economic booms and recessions, stability and upheaval. And tonight, it witnesses another chapter in Ontario's democratic story. As Ontarians cast their votes, they aren't just deciding who will lead the province for the next 4 years. They are shaping Ontario's future, just as generations of voters have done before them. Will Premier Ford's decision to call an early election prove to be a masterstroke or a mistake? That's up to the voters to decide. For now, back to you in the studio.
Good evening. Welcome to, look at this, I'm being handed stuff already. Welcome to the local results here on Rogers TV. I'm Dave Carr. I'm your host this evening. I was about to say I'll have a minimal role, but I might be the one reading the numbers. I'm not sure. We have a lot to discuss. We have a lot of numbers to get to you this evening, and we welcome you to our coverage. We are going to be covering the Bruce Grey Owen Sound riding, along with the ridings of Huron-Bruce, Simcoe Grey, and Simcoe North. The polls closed about 5 minutes ago. People who are in the polls get to vote. People who are already in the polling place in line, hoping that there are lines, they get to vote. First results: Grey Bruce Owen Sound, Vickers 5, Hicks 3, Harris 2, and Lowhead 2. So those are the first results handed to me on a piece of paper. So off to the races. We're expected to get the results a lot quicker, and we'll see what happens. When I was voting this morning, they were showing me the speed of the machine and said, we'll be able to do this in a very few minutes, and we'll find out what happened. Around the province, you're probably starting to see some early results. We'll see what happens. We also have, I should tell you, there are 124 ridings in the province of Ontario. The number to watch is 63 for a majority. 63 for a majority. There were about 10.8 million voters eligible to vote. That's a number we'll watch. Approximately 90,700 eligible in the Bruce Grey Owen Sound riding. That's a number we'll watch. And we will bring you your local results. We're also going to be taking a look at some fascinating races all around the province. Etobicoke North, Doug Ford, Mississauga Lakeshore, I think, or Mississauga East for Bonnie Crombie, Toronto Davenport for Merritt Stiles, and Guelph for the Green leader, Mike Schreiner. Michael Harris is here, as Michael Harris has been here before, and he has assembled a panel of people to observe, opine, suggest, and generally react to the numbers that we're going to see tonight. Michael, good evening.
Yeah, hi. Good evening, Dave. Thank you very much. And of course, we saw David Shearman hand his hand as we came in, who's going to be integral to our coverage tonight and the whole Rogers team. So yeah, I'm Michael Harris. I'm back. It's an early election, a year and a half earlier maybe than we thought we'd be here discussing a provincial election, but nonetheless, we're happy to be here to bring you local results. I am joined tonight by three people that will help us break down the results, as Dave said. To my farthest left, you'll see Chad Richards, a former Conservative employee and now working in private industry, and we're happy to have him here helping us break down the election. Chris Neudorf here to my left, who's a teacher at John Diefenbaker Senior School right now, teaching civics and history and lots of other things. And of course, to my right, someone that is well known to local political aficionados, Kimberly Love, who has been a candidate for the Liberal Party and has been on our panel before, I believe, and been here as a guest being interviewed, I'm sure. So lots of great knowledge on the panel, and I will give most of the talking to them, I hope, tonight. But we'll start maybe, and Kimberly, we'll start with you. We'll go around the table, but each of you maybe could give us one thing that you're watching for, looking for in the election results tonight.
Oh, I would love to see the Conservative government punished for an unnecessary election. That would be sort of on top on my wish list. And I think locally, same thing. We've got a Conservative candidate here whom I haven't seen. I didn't get out to Katie, but I think that this government has been showing real disrespect to the voters, both in Ontario and locally. We have an amazing Liberal candidate in Selwyn Hicks, and I don't know why in the world he wouldn't simply rise to the top, but we'll see what the results are going to be today.
Yeah, we will, and we'll touch on some of those things that you brought up as we go along. Lots to unpack there for sure. Chris, as we come to you, what's something that you're looking for as the results come in tonight?
Well, a lot of my thoughts are similar to Kimberly's, although with respect, I think that our candidate James Harris was even better.
Just so we're clear, James Harris is no relation to me. I guess I should put that out there, okay? And I think he's a fine person, just so that the viewers know. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Of course. I agree that I'm a bit of a pessimist. I don't think it's very realistic that we're going to see Doug Ford's government toppled in this instance, even though, in all honesty, I think that it ought to be. I am most interested if Doug Ford is going to be forming a minority government going forward. I'm not supremely optimistic, but I am hopeful. I think that his government has taken a very bull in the china shop approach to governing, and I think a minority would probably be better to mitigate that. The other question that I have that's really front in my mind is, will the NDP remain official opposition? I think this has been an amazing opportunity for my party, and I hope that we retain that position. I think we've earned it. I think we've been very strong critics of this government. We've been very strong opposition for a non-minority government opposition. So those have been my primary. The one last thing that I am very curious about, that I'm sure we'll discuss as we go forward, is what will the actual turnout be? Election turnout in Ontario has not been on a positive trend, and I don't feel that this election has been an election called in the interest of encouraging voter turnout, which I consider to be a disturbing track for democracy. So that's, I think, above my own party and the placement of the parties in general. What I really am concerned about is how low is that number going to be?
Yeah. Again, there's more stuff to unpack as we go forward. And Chad, I'll give you a chance to weigh in. What are you watching for tonight as the results come in?
Yeah, similarly to what Chris mentioned, I'm watching turnout. Low voter turnout. Elections tend to favor incumbents, so we'll see if that trend continues. We saw in the last election with about 44% turnout. I can potentially see it going even lower than that this time around. So definitely we'll be watching that. And on kind of the macro provincial level, I'm actually curious to see if the PCs can crack 90 seats. I think it's, judging by the province-wide polling, I think it's doable. That would be kind of super majority territory, and could come with some challenges once in government too, when you think of caucus management.
Yes.
So definitely we'll be watching that. And locally, just always curious to see what the turnout is like locally and how the local candidates do here. So watching all those things.
Yeah, and so we're going to go back to Dave Carr. He's got some results coming in. You can see on your screen, we've got predictions and things as polls start to come in, but certainly not closed. So Dave, back to you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, other networks are already calling a progressive conservative majority government. You can see on your screen, I told you at the beginning that 63 was the number for a simple majority. You can see that the Conservatives are leading, elected or leading, in 76 ridings already. It's not yet 15 minutes since the polls closed. The New Democrats, as of right now, would form the official opposition with 22 elected or leading. The Liberals with 16, the Greens with 2 elected or leading, and 1 independent, which I'm curious about. Sylvia Jones has been elected in Dufferin-Caledon. I was going to be interested in Peel Region overall because Bonnie Crombie is from Peel Region, former mayor of Mississauga. 12 ridings in Peel Region. I'd be curious, they were all won by Conservatives the last time. I'd be interested to see whether the Liberal leader could make any headroad in the region in which she was a municipal mayor. David Shearman, you heard Michael mention David Shearman, the host of Politically Speaking. He's here running numbers for us, looking at all of these ridings around the province, because there are some fascinating races. 90,723 eligible voters in Bruce Grey Owen Sound, 87,741 in Huron-Bruce, 127,971 in Simcoe Grey, and 104,502 in Simcoe North, the 4 ridings that we are looking at. Whether we have voter totals based on the eligible voters, whether we have all of that while we're doing this tonight, either this evening or going ahead into the weekend, something for all of us to take a look at and consider. Still no change, 76. We're showing 77 elected or leading for the Conservatives. 23 for the NDP, 15 for the Liberals, and 3 for the Green. You can see on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the numbers coming up for local ridings. And you'll see David Shearman's arm coming in. Lisa Thompson, Minister of Rural Affairs, has been re-elected in Huron-Bruce riding. That is being called by the CBC. That's who's calling that at the present time. So, Michael, some early returns. And again, for our viewers, the numbers on the screen, the local numbers in particular on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see that in the Bruce Grey Owen Sound riding, Paul Vickers is leading. Lisa Thompson is the first to be declared elected by other networks. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So yeah, the results are coming in fast and furious. And of the 4 local ridings we're watching, it is Paul Vickers that doesn't have kind of the check mark yet, not enough polls responding or enough numbers leading. But the other 3, as you can see them on your screen, all declaring the Conservative candidates victorious so far. Again, less than half the polls, so numbers can change. I guess I want to ask the question, in the lead into our show tonight, there was a good little history lesson about calling early elections, things like that. I certainly go back to 1990, kind of the first election I can remember. And David Peterson got punished. Maybe we'll start with you, Chris. Why, seemingly so far, 20 minutes in, 50 minutes in, why is Doug Ford's government not getting punished for this early election call?
Oh, man, isn't that the million-dollar question? I have a few thoughts on that. I think, first off, this is why I asked earlier about turnout. I think a big part of it is because people aren't really engaged with this election. I think that there's so much happening on the global scale right now, and so much happening with the U.S., that this election has sort of been sucked of oxygen. Combine that with one of the worst winters in Ontario in 20 years, and it's very difficult to engage with an election, and also consider the fact that we haven't had a February election in Ontario in, I think, since 1880. So bring all that together, and you have a recipe for Ambien. So I think part of it is disengagement. I think another part of it is the fact that, frankly, I think Ford has done a very good job obfuscating from some of the more controversial elements of his government. I think he managed to make this election about tariffs, which is a remarkable achievement considering that's a federal issue and not provincial. But by doing so, he didn't have to talk about uncomfortable issues like the Greenbelt or the outrageous amount of money that's being spent on the redevelopment of Ontario Place and the Science Centre. He didn't have to talk about the possible $1.3 billion being lost with this new LCBO and beer store contract. Didn't talk about the $20 billion of debt that has been accrued by a series of increasingly baffling decisions. He didn't talk about any of that because he can talk about the tariff issue, which he doesn't actually have to marry with any strict policy. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Conservative policy only just came out 2 days ago.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, I thought kind of all the parties were fairly late getting their, all the major parties were fairly late getting their platforms out. Right, and certainly Conservatives coming out later, and they did dictate when the election was happening, right?
That's the thing. If there's one party that knows when the election is going to happen, it's the party that's calling it.
So, Kimberly, what about you? Like, why is this strategy? I think I know the answer, but your input is why this isn't landing as that time to punish Doug Ford for calling an early election like other governments have experienced in the past.
Well, I agree that he found a moment when he could exploit distraction. The Liberals are in the middle of, and I'm in the middle of, like a leadership campaign for ours. I think that people don't make a distinction between federal and provincial politics. Yeah. So I think that there's general chaos. I think it's a winter election, and I do think that that's going to affect turnout. And we are all focused on Trump and Canada, and this election is just, I think, going under the radar. Yeah. So, I mean, part of the history lesson was sometimes you're punished and sometimes you're not, right? So I think that he called his moment when there was sort of maximum distraction, and he's going to get another government. Yeah. We didn't need this election.
Yeah. And Chad, your thoughts on that too, the early election and maybe what it does if these numbers hold true, what that does for the Conservatives moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. It sort of feels like an election that could have been an email, right? Like it's where we sort of started at the same level of polling.
Don't give him ideas.
Yeah, electronic. Yeah,
that's a perfect phrase for it, honestly.
We'll just tweet our votes and it'll be over.
I think to Chris's point, like the crowded news cycle on on any given day, the Ontario election had to fight news coming out of the White House, federal leadership election. So when you're the third most important topic in the middle of an election cycle, it's really hard to get traction and to get issues to cut through. So I think the strategy in making that, the campaign strategy in terms of calling an election in that news frame, definitely proving to be helpful, and really running the ballot question on tariffs and Trump and leadership in that vantage point. I think that really has been the central frame of the campaign, and it's been difficult to get any other issues to cut through. And I think that's the frame that the PCs wanted to fight this campaign on, and really use that crowded news frame to an obvious advantage there. I mean, going forward, to have a 4-year runway, that gives a pretty significant leeway in government to tackle some of these issues like tariffs and whatnot going forward. And a majority government obviously makes that a little bit easier going forward.
And as you said, Kimberly, at the federal level with the Liberals, we're going to have at some point a new prime minister for the premiers to work with as well.
Very soon, yes.
Yeah. And so my grade 12 political science teacher was Mr. Mitches, and he said to respect the voters, you don't in Ontario, you don't have an election in the winter or in the middle of the summer, because as Canadians we need our holidays in the summer, and in the winter we have missed 23 school days. I know Chris knows that number well too. You maybe had more than me. But so and so again, we'll see that by the voter turnout and things like that too. And of course, signs, political signs. It's sort of been an easy visual election to ignore because we're not inundated with signs all over the place whether on road corners or people's lawns. Right. Just those simple signs of an election that's happening. Yeah, it's interesting. So we've already kind of touched on it, but it is difficult for voters to differentiate between these federal issues of international trade and stuff like that. How can parties, how can candidates do a better job, and maybe we'll start with you, Chad, of helping voters, or how can we do a better job of helping voters understand the differences of what, say, the provincial people are running for right now and what we're having to deal with our relations with the United States?
It's kind of the age-old question, is how do we get people to better understand the division of power between different governments. I know, having worked in federal politics, we regularly receive calls about provincial issues, municipal issues, et cetera. And it's kind of an age-old challenge that we have in politics, is getting people to differentiate. I think it is a really crowded space right now, and we're in an incredibly unique time where, at the same time as we want to distinguish between powers, there's also talk of a Team Canada approach to tackling the tariffs, and really ensuring that all the premiers are going down there and pushing a Team Canada message. So that makes it even more distorted and even more difficult for folks to understand where things are headed in that space.
And Kimberly, is there anything candidates could have done, and not just in our riding, but in ridings throughout Ontario? Is there anything candidates that you see, because you've been in this position, going door to door, knocking for yourself and for candidates that you supported. Was there a way that candidates could have done a better job in bringing to light some of the issues that maybe were more focused around a political election versus this confusion of division of power and the other stuff that's in the news cycle?
I think part of it is that people feel overwhelmed by the number of issues. And if you can run an election on one of those issues, or possibly two, and break through with that, I think that is the only way that you can distinguish. They can't sit there with a list and understand this is, I was asked about potholes,
right,
and I was federal. So people don't understand the distinction between levels of government. They're just one citizen looking for the things that they need, and you're at the door. So you're the one that gets it. But if you can isolate one or two issues, and I think with maybe a little bit more prep time, the Liberals and the NDP and the Greens could have crafted a campaign that really held Doug Ford to account. And I don't think that they really had that opportunity.
And Chris, was there an issue that maybe could have been that? So if we take that idea of more prep time for some of the opposition parties and fighting for more seats, is there one issue that you think could have been that kind of wedge that maybe could have been driven home to Ontario voters?
Oh, man, that's the one is the hard part here. But I'll tell you what I think really could have been public versus privatization.
to me, would be the big one. We have really overlooked the fact that the Ford administration has begun to privatize healthcare. Now, if we look at, say, Angus Reid polling, 70% of Canadians writ large across the political spectrum, including Conservatives, are against the privatization of healthcare. But I think there's been so many distractions, people haven't noticed this. And privatization goes beyond just healthcare. The privatization of education has been floated. We saw in the previous Liberal administration, well, 2 previous administrations, the privatization of electrical power generation. I think privatization has been slowly nickel and diming Ontarians in so many ways. And I think if we get back to talking about the basics, about how government can actually be a force for good and can actually reduce the cost of living for people rather than empower corporate interests, I think that would get people engaged. There's a wonderful expression I like. Why would you care if someone's finger is in the pie if you don't get a slice? So I think politics is becoming a bit irrelevant to people. And I think by talking about things like the benefits of public access and public nationalization, I think you can make politics relevant to people again. I think right now that's part of the problem. So writ large, just to cheat, because I'm doing a lot of issues here, I think public versus privatization as a broad issue is something I'd like us to be talking about a lot more.
And Dave, we've been talking over here for a little while. I'm going to throw it back to you. And what are you seeing? I've jotted some numbers down, so we'll get to them when we come back. But what are you seeing so far as these results come in that's catching your eye?
Well, I have no specific new information for you, but it's showing up on your screen that the Conservatives in the 4 local ridings that we're covering, the Conservatives have about a 2-to-1 plurality over their closest opponent. The closest race happens to be in Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, but it is still a commanding performance for Paul Vickers, a Meaford area farmer who threw his hat in the ring, unlike in the last election, was duly nominated by his party and is carrying the banner. Before the show, we were out in the, I guess, the green room, and considering, you know, this kind of traditional sort of blue roof across southern Ontario, Huron-Bruce, Bruce Grey, Simcoe North, it's all through down the... What was going to happen in Toronto? What was going to happen in Ottawa? Those are the things that I haven't seen yet, but they may be showing up in the basic numbers. Other networks are calling a PC majority. They're now elected or leading in 78. They are now, David Shearman is handing me more numbers here. The New Democrats look like they will form the official opposition again, as they are now starting to pull away from the Liberals. Elected or leading in 24 seats, the Liberals in 12 seats, the Green elected or leading in 2 seats, and 1 independent. And I have to ask David Shearman if he can tell me who that independent is. Let me see. Bobby Ann Brady, an independent in Haldimand. I think that's in Haldimand. She's elected. So there's your independent. Mike Schreiner, the Green leader, is elected in Guelph. What else do we have? Merritt Stiles, re-elected in Toronto, Davenport. So I haven't heard about Bonnie Crombie yet, which is interesting. All of the leaders appear to have been re-elected, and we're waiting to hear whether Bonnie Crombie will take a seat for the first time, former mayor of Mississauga. Again, you're watching your numbers. There's Paul Vickers, 14,000 to about 9,000. So not quite a 2-to-1 plurality, but in other ridings that we're watching, the plurality for the leader is getting on to 2-for-1. Michael and your panel, does that shout at you?
Which? Does what?
The pluralities.
Oh, yeah.
The 2-to-1 pluralities.
Yeah. Well, so Chad, let's start with you. Those the big victories that some people are experiencing. What does that say to you?
I think it expresses, confidence in the government, confidence in the local candidates. I think we're seeing, I think Paul Vickers, even now numbers are bumping up again, and it's good to see Paul get that support. I think he's, a strong candidate with a good record as a councillor over in Meaford, and also a good connection to the ag sector as well too. And I think writ large across the province, it expresses general confidence in the government as well too.
And Kimberly, do those margins of victory, do they surprise you?
Well, probably not, although I would take 16,000 versus 11 and say to Dave that that's not a 2 to 1.
That's not a 2 to 1. That's the
I
only
think
one.
Selwyn Hicks is
Yeah.
performing very, very
Yeah.
well, as he should.
That,
And
yeah,
I'm sure,
that was the one I was really curious.
I'm
with
sure that
Selwyn.
Paul Vickers is a wonderful person, but I have not had the opportunity to meet that candidate because he didn't come out to the events. So.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll get your comment on that too, and some of the margins of victory, and then I'm going to come back to where you finished off, Kimberly, with it.
So I suppose the first thing I would acknowledge, and just working off Kimberly's point to an extent, just looking at the brief numbers, hope we get ours again soon. Right now, it doesn't look like our Paul Vickers, who I've also never seen, but I certainly can imagine, that he doesn't appear to have an actual simple majority. And I do think that is significant because if we look at the 2021 election federally, while Alex Ruff came very close to a majority, if I recall, it was 49%. So I do think to some extent we are beginning to see a bit of a thaw on that grip of conservatism, slow though it may be. One thing else I wanted to point out, and this is maybe getting a bit granular, but I noticed on our feeds a really interesting trend, and I'm really fascinated. There it is again. If you look at the voter share.
So yeah, so folks, we have access to some other numbers that you're not seeing. So I'll run them down because I wrote it down, and then Chris will come back to you to comment on it. So the way it stands right now, the Conservatives have about 44% of the popular vote. The Liberals about 30%, and the NDP close to 20%. Yet the NDP are almost double the seats of the Liberals. Mm-hmm. So, but having half of the popular vote.
And this is if you're the kind of person to watch local coverage of an election, you probably know what first past the post is already. But that is where it's a winner-take-all system where the person who has the highest number of votes in a riding wins that riding regardless of the other votes, whether it be 30%, 40%. Yeah. You don't have to have a simple majority. What this means is often our parliament doesn't reflect the exact voter numbers. What's interesting is first past the post generally benefits the strongest parties, the leading party and the opposition. The NDP, as a result, usually are not the beneficiaries of the system. Usually their representation is undervalued against their voter share. In this case, we're seeing the opposite. And I think what this reflects is something that the Liberals have been reluctant to acknowledge. In Ontario, the NDP is the opposition party. The Liberals are losing that position, and the NDP are starting to enjoy the benefits of being a first opposition party in Ontario. And as I'm looking at these results, I'll tell you the doubling that I'm really interested in. 13 Liberal, 24 NDP so far. We almost have a 2-to-1 lead on the Liberals. I think it's about time that we start acknowledging that the dynamics are shifting. This is becoming a Conservative versus NDP, not Conservative versus Liberal province.
Okay. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for all of that. I do understand it all, but I wasn't ready for it all. And of course, because then if we look at percentages, you could say, well, here's the problem with the system, of course, right? That it doesn't recognize. And as you said in the past, the NDP would have said, look, we should be more represented. We got a higher vote share. Yes. Where the Liberals right now could be screaming from the hills, we should be in second place. Where the Liberals are finishing second in a lot of ridings to Conservatives, and NDPs are winning the few ridings they're doing well.
Can I add one very quick thought,
yes.
one sentence promise?
That's okay, we're here to talk, no problem.
If the Liberals would like to go back to talking about first past the post reform, I think the NDP is still very open to doing that, and perhaps there'll be a greater appreciation for the fact that we actually really do need to reform this. As much as I'm happy to see part of these results, the Parliament, I think, should more accurately reflect the actual voter share. And I agree. It's interesting to look at it as a bellwether of where the political winds are shifting, but as an actual electoral issue, I think it actually is a serious problem.
Yeah. And Chad, I'll let you pick up on anything you've heard or thought of in the last couple of minutes. There's a lot there. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, specifically how the vote share is translating to seats. So interestingly, a couple thoughts on that. I think the NDP has a bit more of what we call an efficient vote, so that vote comes in more strategic places or targeted places, so you have a higher concentration of voters in a specific riding, lending itself to getting those seats in a first-past-the-post system. And I do think the structure that's been created around having that official opposition infrastructure for the NDP has allowed them to build up a bit more of a machine than what they've had typically in the past. And in a lower voter turnout election, you need those get out the vote efforts more and more. And I think we might be seeing some of that at play, just having that more of a machine built up, and a bit more of a machine built up than what the Liberals have, combined with a bit more of an efficient vote concentration.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly, I did see a lot of campaigns, whether it be social media or otherwise, about the strategic voting idea, right? Like, you whether you support it, and that's not new, of course. We're voting. We got to vote together to beat that candidate, so everybody team up on this one, right? And so it does look like the NDP, based on their seats that they're earning provincially, have been more effective at concentrating on those ridings. And Kimberly, I wanted to come back to something that you said, and it certainly got a lot of play, not just in Bruce Grey Owen Sound or in Simcoe Grey, Simcoe North here on Bruce, but the absence of a lot of Conservative candidates from all candidates meetings and things like that. Again, I'll ask, why does that not seem to be having much of or how do we get them there, or why is that not having much of an effect, seemingly, on these election results?
Well, it's hard to explain. I think that this election has been subsumed by so many other things that they are just, they're not being held accountable. I think that we knew that Doug Ford had given orders that a bunch of his people didn't have to attend these debates. I think it's very disrespectful to the constituents to not even show up, to not have an opportunity to even meet this person who is going to be our representative. But in the general chaos of a midwinter February election, with Trump calling the shots from the White House how often does he tweet in a day?
Or Elon Musk calling shots.
Right. I mean, Vice President
Co-president,
Trump. And a lot of the liberal apparatus focused on a federal leadership race at the moment. All of that means that they're getting, I think, much too easy a ride.
So, Chad, I'm going to come to you on that about the all candidates meetings and such. Does it talk at all about a change about how messages get out there? Certainly, when I started following my uncle around all candidates meetings, there wasn't social media, there wasn't, elaborate email campaigns, things like that. In order for the public to really get to know the candidates, they did have to go to a town hall meeting. And even at those times, the argument often was the only people going are ones that have already made up their minds. I know that's one of the arguments. But is this showing the shift in campaigning, and maybe there needs to be a different approach to getting all the candidates together?
Yeah, and there were those crazy things called newspapers at the time
that's
too.
Right.
It was it's a different environment. Certainly, I think, as a matter of kind of democratic principle, it's important to engage with people and meet them where they're at. The argument that all candidates meetings are for the decided voter has been around for some time now. And I think candidates are finding new ways to engage with voters, whether that is through social media, through one-on-one meet and greet opportunities. We saw quite a few of those throughout the constituency here in this campaign. And I think it's a matter of where their time is spent in such a shortened period, and when you're not getting maybe a lot of that local coverage in local media outlets about the candidates meetings themselves. It's just trying to find that efficiency of time on where you connect with people.
Yeah. So we're sitting, as you can see, your results on the screen. Chad had wondered whether the Conservatives would get to 90 seats. I think was the number. They're 79, so getting close to 80. But Dave, I've seen you get handed a few slips of paper, so we'll go over to you and see what's going on at your desk.
I'll just tell you some very quick things. First of all, you're watching the local results on Rogers TV, Grey County. 79 for the Progressive Conservatives. That is the number of seats they held at dissolution of the 43rd Parliament. And in case you don't know, we are holding an election for the 44th Ontario Parliament. 79 is the number of seats they held at dissolution. I have not yet looked up to confirm what the opposition and third-party seats were in the legislature, but you can see on your screen 79, 24, 13. The Progressive Conservatives, the New Democrats, and the Liberal Party. 2 for the Green, and 1 independent who has been elected. declared elected. The New Democrats held Windsor West, which is, I think, something they were expected to do. But the Liberals have been flipping a couple of seats. Kimberly, the Liberals flipped Etobicoke Lakeshore, so there is a pullback from the Progressive Conservatives. The Liberals flipped Toronto St. Paul, and that was Stephanie Smythe, who was the daughter of Dick Smythe, longtime CKLW, if you listen to radio, or Chum, 1050 Chum. He was the news director for years and years and years and years, and I think you saw him at City TV as well, doing his editorials. A Liberal flip in Don Valley North, Kimberly. So some of these are happening. It's interesting to talk about them. Sadly for you, they don't reflect the numbers on the screen. David is going to hand me a couple of more where we find that Paul Vickers has now been declared elected in Bruce Grey Owen Sound riding, and Brian Sanderson has now been declared elected in Simcoe Grey. So and I'm not sure that I had a Jill Dunlop from Simcoe North, but you could see on the screen that she did have a commanding lead, so I think we're just waiting to see and hear some of that. So a couple of Liberal flips, but the numbers tell the story. The Progressive Conservatives have now dropped back by one, because these numbers represent ballots that are still coming in. So, and the phrase that we've always used is elected or leading, because things change in some of the closer ridings. In the last Ontario election in 2022, there were quite a number of very, very close races, and some of those were expected to be close again, and some of that is bearing out. I, for one, still haven't heard about Bonnie Crombie, and I've been looking at things, and I don't see anything about Bonnie Crombie yet, but the Liberal leader, but we'll let you know. The other leaders all appear to have been re-elected. Bonnie Crombie was the newcomer seeking a seat for the first time. Michael Harris and your panel, some fascinating conversations. I would like to point out, because you were talking about the timing of this election, this is the first time Ontario has gone to the polls in February in 142 years. The last time this province went to the voters was in February. In fact, it was 142 years ago today, February 27th, 1883. That was the last time we had a February election. Michael.
Well, and of course, that many years ago, I wasn't supposed to be in Wyerton coaching an 18U girls volleyball practice, but the head coach, Avery, can do it herself. She doesn't need me tonight, so she'll be looking after things up in Wyerton. But yeah, it is an odd thing to have a winter election. I told you, Mr. Mitch has said you don't do it to respect the voters, but here we are. I'm going to come back to St. Paul's riding, because I lived there for a couple of years, and Michael Bryant, of course, provincially, and Dr. Carolyn Bennett, who I know you know quite well. You worked quite closely with her. And actually, she was on my Politically Speaking with you and I many years ago. So that's going back to a Liberal provincially. And what does that do for that riding, or what does that say? Do you know the candidate there?
I do not know the candidate there, but
They're bringing that back to a Liberal riding.
Yeah, Carolyn had done an excellent job of creating what she called, I think, a people's parliament. She did a very good job of sort of consulting in her riding. She was very, very accessible. And so I was really disappointed when Carolyn left and that riding left Liberal hands, and delighted to see it back, because I think that should be a good Liberal stronghold.
And of course, she was a federal MP, right? And Michael Bryant was the Liberal provincially, and he held it for a long time before the most recent NDP.
Now Carolyn's trying to keep Greenland in Denmark. She's the she's the ambassador in Denmark right now.
Yeah. Dave, sorry, yes, we'll come back to you.
I'll just point out that Stephanie Smythe, pardon me, the winner in Toronto St. Paul's, is a former news anchor at CP24, and that visibility, that popularity, may be part of her success. You remember, this riding was always a Liberal stronghold, and federally it was always a Liberal stronghold. Suddenly, federally, it was not, and now in Ontario, the Liberals lost it in that big defeat in 2018. Now Stephanie Smythe, Liberal, has brought it back. So.
Yeah, thank you for that context, Dave. Yeah, so things do change, right? And of course, we're not seeing that locally right now. Lisa Thompson has been in office a long time, of course, a Conservative in Bruce Grey-Owen Sound for a long time. I did think that maybe Paul Vickers would face an uphill battle, seeing as Rick Byers was only there for one term. And maybe you could speak, and I don't know, we'll start with you, Chad, whether there was surprise or how a party reacts. You've been in the inner workings of campaigns and things like that. How a party reacts when you kind of think that candidate who has won will run again. So when someone you can speak specifically to this riding if you like, or just in general, what does that do to a party organization when they have to all of a sudden, holy, we're the incumbents, but we have a new person?
Yeah, it's interesting because it can be both a challenge to overcome, but an opportunity for sure. So definitely it demonstrates the importance of having that infrastructure built up, having a good electoral district association, a good riding association that's ready to go really at any time. The challenge is definitely you've built a campaign or a strategy around an individual, and now you're switching that up. The opportunity comes in, and particularly with this time around, with Mr. Vickers won in a nomination process that actually has the effect of kind of galvanizing some folks locally before you have sets of candidates for the nomination out, signing up new members, and really moving messages that way. And I think that can actually be kind of a driving force headed right into an election, and you've built up a base of people that are supporting you and moving things forward that way. So definitely, I think you can ride that momentum right into a general if the timing is right.
And Chris, you can comment on that too, but also just and again, Kimberly, this might be a question for you too, because your political experience in being candidates, both of you are locally. What's the challenge knowing that you're fighting that uphill battle against, what we call these strongholds? We've used that word a few times tonight. But how do you keep a party organization engaged and energized and fighting for what that party organization wants when it's generally a long shot when it comes to the general election time?
It's a great question. I honestly, passion's a big part of it. I know that every member of our EDA, we passionately believe in this. And you have to keep fighting for it. When I ran for office, I did not entertain illusions that I was going to win that election. But what I did tell myself is that I had an opportunity to tell people there is an alternative. There's another way of looking at things. Maybe this is the teacher in me, but just the idea of getting people to think about an alternative is in and of itself a reward. You asked about ACMs earlier. I'm not going to go into that, but one thought I had about it. One of the coolest moments in my campaign in 2021 was after the first ACM that I had a chance to be in. I had to miss one for work, which I think is a good enough reason, I hope. But we got an email from a fellow who said that he had never in his life supported the NDP. But after watching the debate, he had decided that he wanted to donate to our campaign and support it. And that meant the world. The chance to actually talk to people and engage in these important issues. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think that when you believe in something, the chance to spread that idea is its own reward.
And so, Kimberly, in your experience, I know you have been involved far beyond simply those campaigns. I know you worked really hard to get more women involved in politics, for instance, and other things. So, where do you and where do others get the energy from locally to keep the Liberal Party Association and be ready when elections are called? And of course, Liberals have been in office in Bruce Grey-Owen Sound in the past.
We have.
But so where does that energy come from, and that say devotion to your beliefs in your party?
Well, part of it is you never assume that the opposition is a foregone conclusion. You never assume that that's going to be a Conservative riding. It's been a Liberal riding before, it could be a Liberal riding again. But I agree on the subject of the passion that drives the people who comprise the volunteer group who are out there every day working. Between 2011 and 2015, I was asked to be part of a shadow caucus, which is an idea that came up from the grassroots through, our convention process. The idea really championed by Carolyn Bennett, who said, we can just, keep booking smaller and smaller caucus rooms every election, or we can start to get the voices from those unheld ridings into our policy process, right? And into our caucus mechanism. So that was actually very rewarding, but kept me really on the ground continuously between 2011 and 2015. It ended with me getting only 38% of the vote, but that was a high watermark.
Yeah.
And my moment actually was after we had done the all candidates event at OSCVI, then OSCVI, and a group of girls came up to me afterwards and said, like, how would I get to be a candidate? Because I had never thought about women being candidates. And I thought, if that's all you get from how many years you've been on the ground, that's like enough, right? You are bringing that. So they see a lot of men. There's always a lot of men. Look at all the pictures of the history thing that we saw. Men, 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 men. And getting women involved, I think, is really important. And we did run, it was a municipal campaign school. We called it Run, Jane, Run. It was modeled off of something that I had attended in Waterloo Region. And in the first year that we ran that, because we've got an opportunity in how many different municipalities do we have in Bruce Grey Sound? I'm going to say 13, I might be wrong. And we actually, after our first campaign school, graduates of our campaign school unseated both the Bruce County Warden and the Grey County Warden in that election. Women given the tools can actually do that. So for me personally, growing up about 4 farms from where Agnes MacPhail was raised, attending the same schools that she would have attended, the idea of women in politics was a real driver for me and kept me at it.
Yeah, and of course MacPhail Elementary School in Flesherton.
Yes.
So yeah, that name's still going strong. And we're going to go right back to Dave Carr because lots of stuff coming in now.
Well, Kimberly, you're not going to like this. The Progressive Conservatives are leading by 1,500 votes in Mississauga East, Cooksville. That is Bonnie Crombie's riding. That is leading. Nobody's been elected there yet. Peel Region, and this is something I was interested in. There are 12 seats in Peel Region. Bonnie Crombie's seat is obviously one of them in that riding, but all of the others have gone all blue. So Peel Region, they made no games. Algoma Manitoulin is still a toss-up. But there are a couple of flips. The Liberals flipped Nepean from the NDP, and the Conservatives flipped Hamilton Mountain from the NDP. The numbers on the screen, 79 for the Progressive Conservatives at dissolution of this last Parliament, 28 for the NDP. They are now elected or leading in 24. 9 for the Liberals, who are now elected or leading in 13, and 2 for the Green Party and Bonnie Brady and Haldeman, the Independent, who has been re-elected against the mayor of Haldeman. That's who she was running against, a very popular mayor. But you don't see independents elected in Ontario elections. Bonnie Brady has done it twice. Michael.
Yeah, certainly the idea of an independent, we've seen great candidates run as independents, but it just doesn't seem to work. I don't know if anybody wants to comment if they know that candidate or why that works for. Go ahead, Chet.
Yeah, I think it's quite a historic win there. So we've seen it candidates before who were part of a party before and then run again in the following election and be able to pick up that seat. This is someone who ran in the last election as an independent, served a whole term as an independent, and then ran a subsequent election as an independent and still won the seat. It's really fascinating, and it demonstrates the power of local politics, and I think it's really incredible to see that in Haldeman.
Yeah, because the challenge is you don't have any party association for volunteers, for financing, for the whole thing. So yeah, really interesting that will go down like that. I don't know if you have a comment on that, Chris?
A very brief one.
Yeah.
Because I think it's rather cool to see that. When we actually think about the history of our first past the post system, it wasn't built with partisan politics in mind.
Just going to say that.
And we'll give you a chance.
They didn't even have the party names on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
It was the whole idea is to elect someone in your community who has the extraordinary capacity to represent your community's interests.
Right.
Now, partisan politics is how it functions now, that's how it operates, but whenever I see an independent elected, I actually kind of love it, because that is, at least in theory, the idea behind first past the votes, behind our riding system,
Right.
is someone local who understands our issues, who will bring it to the broader country. So I say congratulations and
Yeah.
here. So I find it rather inspiring.
Yeah, it's an example of constituency politics. And part of my discomfort with proportional representation, in which I am very, very lonely because everyone that I know is a big proponent of PR, I'm a great believer in constituency politics. I think that one person is, what's invested in them is the care of that constituency. I think that, we want parties to have less power, actually, and constituents to have more power. So it's really great to see that she managed to pull that off.
Can I very briefly respond to that? Because I think
Yeah.
that's a great point.
No, it doesn't even have to be that brief, Chris. You're doing well. Don't worry about it.
I am
If you've got stuff to say, that's why the viewers are here. So let her rip.
I am a verbose person, as my students have suffered.
Yeah.
And I'm always torn, because I'm always torn between political thought, like political theory and political thought, right? What is theoretical politics versus what are we actually dealing with? At a political theory level, that is to say, at like the philosophy of politics, I completely agree. It's unfortunate that partisan politics, I think, has become a necessary component of politics to a certain extent. That being said, I think that the reason I still support proportional voting is in the political context that we're in, ultimately we have this problem where inevitably some party is overrepresented, some party is underrepresented. As an NDP, I know that feeling because often we're one of the underrepresented. And I think that if we're looking at voting as a utilitarian act, we want to have a government that as closely as possible represents the interests of the nationality. I think the other thing we have to consider is that when the first past the post system is designed, you're living in a historical context that is far more insular. There are far more lines of communication between communities, which means that your community is your fiefdom. It's not your province, it's not your country. In a 21st century political context, the world is so much smaller. And in that context, maybe the idea of electing an individual to represent your community, as romantic and frankly lovely as the thought is, maybe that's a little outdated. Maybe we now think at a provincial and national scale. And on that basis, proportional representation makes more sense because it's more representative of the broad interest of a broader community. Tech makes things slow.
Presuming that your vote is for a party and not a person. Because
there's the rub, isn't
we
it?
know
Yeah.
very well that Bill Murdoch, who spent a lot of time in the cheap seats in Queen's Park because he was at odds with his party, was always rolled back into the party in time for an election, because I think they knew that if Bill had run as an independent, he was a constituency politician, he would have been elected. So he would have defeated a conservative candidate had they dared to run one against him. So he's a perfect example of that constituency politician. And I think in our rural ridings, there is real value in having constituency politics. I do think that a ranked ballot would be a much better system than what we've got now. I think that if we had a ranked ballot in Bruce Grey Sound, the big beneficiary would be the Green Party. I think that there's a lot of Green voters who are desperate to vote Green and wind up voting strategically because they think the Greens are not going to be able to push this over the top. And I think that if they had the choice to do one Green, two Liberal, or whatever, the Liberals, I think, have suffered from being the party that's the most likely one. And we are the recipient of those votes, and that should probably end.
We'll pick up on all this. We're going to go over to Dave Carr for a second. He's ready with some more information for us.
I'm really actually going to join your conversation just briefly on one note, because you're talking a lot about the style of voting. Australia has had mandatory voting since 1924.
Right.
Since 1924, it has been mandatory voting. A lot of people ask, why have we never considered that? We talk about the various other forms. And I'm going to tell you about Bonnie Crombie here in just a second and then throw it back to you. But the other point is a change to what you consider a more fair system of voting has been tried a total of 6 times across this country. A very big push in Ontario a couple of decades ago. It's been tried 3 times in Ontario. I include the failed federal attempt or abandoned attempt by the government of Prime Minister Trudeau in 2015, 2016. But 6 times, if it is a good idea, I would submit people have not yet found the right precise method for it. Bonnie Crombie, just very quickly. Sylvia Gualtieri, the Conservative and the mother-in-law of Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown and former briefly leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. She is leading Bonnie Crombie 16,249 to 14,850. That is with 48 out of 64 polls reporting. So that is what is happening to Liberal
Another
leader Bonnie
leadership
Crombie
race.
at the present time. Michael.
Yeah, well, and Kimberly just said it. You know, there's another Liberal leadership race, maybe.
I said spare us another
yeah.
leadership.
Hopefully, there's some time, maybe in that one. Dave?
I wonder about that because, and I think the feds are in kind of the same situation with now Bonnie Crombie's been there for a year, but you would still, she hasn't been tested.
Yeah.
You would call this her first election. I think in both cases, what the Liberals will have to do is face the outcome of an election and then really start seriously working on their reset, their rebranding, their rethinking of platform, objectives, goals. I don't think after 1 year and one election loss, I wouldn't think they could toss Bonnie Crombie that easily.
I hope not.
I think if Bonnie Crombie's going to lose her seat or not gain a seat, and the Liberals are going to still be the third party, I think if it's anything for the Liberals, starting tonight, it's an opportunity to rebrand and build from where they are. 14 seats, they had 9 the last time. Is this a start, Kimberly? I don't know.
I think Bonnie Crombie is extraordinary, actually. I knew her personally when she was at the federal level and I was a candidate. I think she would be a remarkable premier. I think that the election has caught the Liberals, in particular, flat-footed. And Bonnie, nevertheless, is pulling more seats than that they had at dissolution.
Well, and that's you mentioned what I was going to ask. Like, as we said, this election was, you could rationalize that Liberals, NDP, whatever, were surprised and weren't ready. And as you said, Bonnie Crombie only on the job for a short time, didn't have an opportunity to really get herself out there as much as she would have liked with another at least year. So I guess we'll start there. What does she do? What do the Liberals do? They've gained some seats, and you can see numbers are always changing. So the Conservatives were up to 79. They were down as far as 76, now back to 78 because things change. But are there moral victories to take from this when you gain a few seats? You know, what are the first steps after an election like this when you're a party that doesn't ultimately form the government?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of analysis, and that will probably be true of all of the parties. I'd like to see with that, we seem to be pulling and you can see that share vote almost 30%.
Yeah, so the Liberals are holding strong. Folks, again, we have some other numbers. Liberals are holding strong about 30% of the popular vote, but sitting with 14 seats. The NDP have 19% of the vote and have 26 seats. So, yeah, sorry.
So my point is that we'll be looking at how we achieve those votes, where are our strengths, where are the weaknesses, how can we make a more efficient vote so we can translate that support actually into seats so that we can, implement the policies that we're so, committed to.
And we're going to go right back to Dave Carr here as we hope to hear from some candidates and things. So go ahead, Dave.
I think we're going to say good evening and congratulations to Lisa Thompson, re-elected in Huron-Bruce. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm holding the phone close to my microphone so that our viewers can hear you. A sizable win for the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario, a sizable win for you in Huron-Bruce. What's your first reaction?
Well, I'm very humbled and committed to continuing to represent these amazing people in Huron-Bruce. I thank them for their faith in me, and I'm going to repay that faith by working just as hard as I did when I was first elected in 2011.
In the advanced polling, Huron-Bruce outpolled every other riding except one, the numbers turning out. Is there something special about the Huron-Bruce riding, Lisa?
Of course, there's something special about Huron Bruce. Absolutely.
Come on now.
But just with that said, you know what? In hearing that, I did not know that. So, but it makes me think back to 2011. In 2011, we were in the top 5 ridings across Ontario for the best overall voter turnout. People are engaged, people young at heart through to people voting for the very first time, because they're proud to call Huron Bruce home. They're engaged. They want to talk about priorities that matter in small town rural Ontario. And I think, if I may, I've demonstrated over the years that I'm proud to call Huron Bruce home. And they are like a shot of adrenaline for me every day at Queen's Park to make sure their voice is heard.
You had quite an effective team working for you.
I sure did. Oh my goodness. I hope you can hear them in the background. We had a young grade 7 want to volunteer with us through to the young at heart again. And whether it was making phone calls, you know, making our way across the snowy sidewalks, through to putting up signs waist deep. It's just been a tremendous experience having a winter election. But you know what really sticks with me? Right from day one, whether I was filling up my vehicle with gas or popping out to buy some windshield washer fluid, people were wanting to stop and talk. And to me, that showed that no matter where I was in the riding, people were appreciative of what I've done in the past and confident in what I can do in this next term. And that, again, is the adrenaline and the inspiration that makes me strive to be even better on behalf of Huron Bruce.
I'm gonna ask you one last question, and it's a question that you can answer with all the full force of being a politician, and I don't want you to do that. I want you to be something other than a politician when I ask you, why did the Progressive Conservatives hold this majority?
Because this is a historic moment in time where we need strong leadership and a team standing shoulder to shoulder with Premier Ford to go up against some hurdles that have not been realized for decades. We are proud in Ontario of our manufacturing base, our agri-food industry, our critical minerals, and our young people that deserve a bright future. And I can tell you with certainty that Ontarians, by way of their vote tonight, recognize that it's Premier Ford and our team that will leave everything on the ice, protecting our jobs, protecting our families, and protecting our economy. And that's Lisa speaking. You know, when I was visiting long-term care homes, a gentleman asked me, and I was quite taken by him. He said, "What are you going to do in your first 100 days?" And I said, "Protect jobs, protect families." And the next thing I heard was a rousing round of applause from the group of seniors in that particular facility. And then I heard, "Give him hell, Lisa." And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Lisa Thompson, we look forward to your future in the Ford government. You've been Minister of Rural Affairs. I'm thinking you might keep that job, but
I hope I do.
Yeah.
I'm genuine, and I have lots to do. I want to get back to work, and I will serve in however the Premier would like me to serve. But I'm from small town rural Ontario at heart, and I know there's so much opportunity. I would be honored to represent rural Ontario at the cabinet table again.
We will let you get back to what is obviously a celebration. Lisa Thompson, congratulations in Huron Bruce.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll talk again. You're watching the local results on Rogers TV, Grey County. That was Lisa Thompson, who was re-elected in Huron Bruce riding. We were able to get her, and I hope and trust that you heard everything clearly. Michael and your panel. I don't have. Do I have any new? Let me take a quick look here. Liberals lead by 8 votes in Mississauga Erin Mills. That was some time ago.
Whoa.
The Progressive Conservatives leading by 212 votes in Eglinton Lawrence, and the Progressive Conservatives leading by 112 votes in Sault Ste. Marie. I think I have a note about Sault Ste. Marie, but for the moment, Michael, we just talked to Lisa Thompson and Huron-Bruce. I'll let you dissect.
So I'm going to go back I maybe should have, we talked about calling an early election. Okay, we already talked about that, but I didn't ask it in this way. Lisa Thompson is re-elected, obviously excited, and has represented Huron-Bruce for a long time, so the voters have sent her back there. And the person asked, what will you do in your 100 days, whatever it is? But she could have done that without having an election. So what do you think, I guess the Conservatives, how can they justify again having this election, I guess, right? They want the new mandate. They're going to end up with a similar number of seats. We can start with you, Chad, if you like. After this election, if someone were to say, why did you do it when they're going to end up similar to where they were, what will the answer be?
Yeah, I think just to start, I want to say congratulations to Lisa Thompson. I think she's been an absolutely incredible member of provincial parliament over in Huron-Bruce, and a really strong defender of rural affairs and rural issues across Ontario as the Minister of Rural Affairs and as the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs for a period of time as well. To the question on, you know, how do we move forward, or why again on the early election call, I think the PCs and the Premier have been clear that they needed a strong mandate to really outlive the Trump administration, and this win and this majority win puts them in that territory. So you have that very clear runway to advance clear policy going forward without that fear again of going to the polls a year later or in the middle of potentially another trade war or the renegotiation of the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement in a year's time. You don't want to be in the middle of an election during that period of time, and I think that would be probably the justification that they'll use going forward.
Okay, thanks. Dave, I'm going to come to you. Sorry, I could read that sort of, but we'll go back to Dave for a second. He's got an update on a riding that we've been paying great attention to.
Well, it's the Liberal leader, and the Progressive Conservatives have held that riding. The mother-in-law of Patrick Brown has won that riding. Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, has failed to gain a seat in the Ontario legislature. I want to quickly tell you about one other riding, Hamilton Centre, where the New Democrat, Robin Lennox, has held the riding. The interesting thing about this riding, this is where Sarah Jama had been the candidate, and she was removed from the party for a variety of things. Our producer, Mike Perry, is here, and he's going to hand me a phone because we're going to talk to Paul Vickers. Paul Vickers, good evening.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. It's Dave Carr at Rogers TV. Thank you for being with us, and congratulations on your victory in Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate that, and it's a special night, that's for sure.
Tell me what's happening where you are right now.
Well, we're just watching the results coming in, and not only in the riding, but we got the TV up here, and it looks like a good solid majority for the province and for the party itself. So it's a great night to be a PC member and to be a PC person in all of Ontario, because I think we can get the job done.
I don't want this to be a cruel question, and I hope you don't take it that way, but this is a blue territory. I mean, we talked earlier, there's a panel here in the Rogers studio, and we were talking about the fact that people like Eddie Sargent and Bob McKessick and other Liberals have held the riding. But this has been traditionally, in most of my time here, a blue riding. Was this, this is the wrong way to put it, but I'm going to ask it, was this automatic?
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was. And I got a piece of advice from Larry Miller right at the very start. He said, Paul, run this election like you're in third place. And every day when we got up and we started heading out the doors to talk to people, that's the way I considered it to be. Nothing's ever given. And if you ever think it is a given that you're going to win, that's the time that you're going to get your butt kicked And I didn't want to be the person getting my butt kicked. So that fear is a great motivator, and I took it seriously. And I talked to as many people as I possibly could, and I wanted to represent them. So no, it's never a safe riding. There's no such thing as a safe riding.
A personal question: what happens to the farm when you go to Queen's Park?
Oh, I got a couple boys. Jack, my youngest son, has been farming with me for 4 years or so now, and the way things are turning out, we may, my older son is talking about coming back and joining the farm also. So no, the farm's going to carry on. I think I need the farm to kind of give me my little spot where I can go back and just get a bit of peace and quiet and just regain my thoughts. So no, the farm's going to live on. That's for sure.
Let me ask you about your representation of two groups of voters. There are people who voted for you because they're conservative. They were going to vote conservative. They voted conservative. But there are people who voted for you because they felt that you would be the best local representative. This is always a dichotomy for people who are voting. How do I choose? What am I looking at? Which is talk to me about those two sometimes different groups of voters.
Yeah, and you know what? They're basically all one group of voters, eh? Like they're PC-minded people. They want their government to work well. They want their business looked after, and they want to make sure their lives are better with the decisions that a progressive conservative party makes. So I think that's the biggest thing. They just want people to make good decisions, appropriate decisions, and they aren't always easy, but you got to make sure you govern for the majority and don't just govern for the minority that does all the talking to you. It's important to realize your decisions have long-lasting effects on people, and that you take it serious, and you do what's right for the majority of the people in the riding.
I know it's only election night. Do you have any early indication? Have there been any conversations before the election about your role at Queen's Park, other than starting out at least as backbencher?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm just shaking a guy's hand here.
That's okay.
Yeah. No, obviously, January 18th, the morning of January 18th, I was a dairy farmer looking to try and get a nomination, and that night I got the nomination for the Progressive Conservative Party, and now, another 5 weeks later, I'm now an MPP, and, I sometimes, I asked Karen, I said, Karen, did you ever think you could possibly be married to an MPP of Bruce Grey Owen Sound? And we kind of have to laugh and kind of pinch ourselves a little bit to say we didn't really see this one on the bingo card when I was 22 years old.
I will let you get back to your celebration. Paul Vickers, congratulations on your victory in Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
We'll talk again.
Yeah, have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Paul Vickers, Bruce Grey Owen Sound, successful candidate in this Ontario election. Is there anything I was going to tell you? Oh, there's still stuff going on the phone. I don't know how to. It's not my phone. I don't know how to deal with this. There we go. We'll do that. It's live television. I don't think I have that Bonnie Crombie lost her seat, and that was the last information I had. And you just heard from Paul Vickers. So, Michael and your panel.
Well, and you mentioned Bonnie Crombie again, and that is, we've talked about her. But on one of our feeds, we can see her speaking. And so, Chris, what do you think? Like, she's saying to her constituents, but she's speaking to a larger group as well, right? As the defeated leader of the Liberal Party. And we'll go around the panel in this setting. What can she be saying to her party to say, okay, we've still got something to build on here, or what is she saying to her supporters?
I think, and this is sort of circling back to something that Kimberly was saying a while ago. I think this is a time for serious reflection for the Liberals. And when I say Liberals, I really do mean very broadly. I think in Canada, in Ontario, around the world, liberalism is on the retreat. And I think that's because we're seeing real economic instability and desperation. And when that happens, I think people tend to swing more towards the left or the right as a response. So I think the Liberal Party broadly really needs to rethink taking stronger stances on positions. Obviously, I think they should move more to the left myself, but I think when it comes to Bonnie, to further echo Kimberly's point, I think it's an awkward situation because to have a leader who has lost their seat is pretty bad look, but I think that I would be sad to see the Liberals leave her so quickly, because
I would too.
I think there's a lot of global context here. My heart really does go out to Bonnie Crombie in this situation, but I think liberalism broadly and liberalism in Canada and Ontario really needs some serious reflection on what it means to be a party which is ultimately a very centrist party in a period where our current structures and our institutions are failing and people want some kind of change. Where does a party that is middle of the road fit in that political context?
I'm going to kind of add to what Chris said. So I think all of us, our hearts and our thoughts go out to all the candidates who were not successful tonight.
Yeah.
We know I've been around candidates who have been successful and unsuccessful no matter what. That's a ton of work. And it's very brave to put yourself out there in front of causes, and you both mentioned the word passion, that you're passionate about taking on a cause. In some cases, you go into the fight knowing that it's not going to work out. In other cases, you go in thinking you're going to be triumphant or have a chance at least, and it doesn't work out. So I think I can say on behalf of everybody, we certainly appreciate all those candidates that are brave enough to put their names on the ballot, to go forward, to speak to constituents, to try and raise other people's concerns. And so everybody that every name you'll see tonight on television deserves to be congratulated for the work that they've done. I'm going to go back to Paul Vickers for a second. So again, he takes over. As he said, he was a farmer, and now he's also something else, and the farm life will go on. But Chad, what does that look like when somebody has to retreat from what we'll call their normal life to now becoming a politician as their main job?
Yeah, it's life's not really the same anymore for Paul. I think he's going to do a great job. He's just a stand-up guy, and I think the farm will be in good hands with his boys there, as he mentioned. But yeah, life definitely changes. Everything you do now is. Whether you want it to be private time or not, you're in the public eye 24/7.
Well, and he mentioned I think his wife Karen as well, right? Yeah. Did you think when we were 22, this is where we'd be?
Yeah.
So
yeah, everything you do now is in the public eye, and there is, Facebook is a tough place to be, and there's always, inevitably going to be a good chunk of the constituency that doesn't agree with what you're doing, and it takes its toll on candidates and on elected officials themselves to see that kind of chatter and the negativity that can come with being somebody in this role. So I think for Paul, it's a matter of trying to distinguish those attacks as political attacks, not personal attacks. That's really the biggest shift that he's going to have to wrap his head around coming into a role like this.
Now I'll get your comment on that too, Kimberly. You've been the candidate. You've been around people that have shifted from private life to public life, and maybe you could comment on both those situations: the toll it takes, or the opportunity, I guess, to put the positive spin on it that it provides somebody in. Making that shift again from private life to public life. To being a candidate.
Yeah. Well, it is life-changing. In my case, I had to give up a seniority position at the university because I had to be ready for a campaign that may happen at any time. So it does change things. I will say that you learn more about your riding. I went places, you've probably experienced this too. I went places, met people, learned things I would never have done if I had not been a candidate. You become very intimately acquainted with your riding. And for me, it was like this long, we didn't know when the election was going to be. We only wanted to make sure that we got Stephen Harper out. That was sort of the big thing. And so I was on the ground trying to learn about the issues in the riding by attending these events and going places and knocking on doors and learning what the real issues were. So it was a life-changing, broadening experience to be a candidate. I'm sure you experienced the same
I
thing.
was hoping I could add just briefly to that.
Yeah, of
'cause
course.
I think that you expressed it beautifully. For myself, I did not grow up in Bruce Grey, Owen Sound. I moved here in 2016. My folks had moved up here earlier. I had dropped out of grad school, kind of finding my place. And then 2019, I moved to Owen Sound. And I don't want to get too emotional here, but running in 2021, I got to know this community that I felt like it adopted me. And the fact that about 9,000 people said, hey, you should represent us. Nothing in my life has been close to that touching and meaningful. And it gave me a deeper connection to this community than I ever felt where I grew up, where I felt in high school. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. It really made this place my home. So I completely understand what you mean. And that as well, that made it worth it. You know, that and that chance that we were talking about earlier to just move the world and people that millimeter that you get the chance by talking to them. That in and of itself, it's its own reward. It was beautiful.
I'm going to send it back over to Dave for a second. We're actually nearing the end of our coverage, I think, if I understand his hand signals correct here. And again, live television, there's sign language, there's paper, there's cell phones. You know, everything works great when it works. But we'll go back over to Dave as we set up kind of coming closer to the end of our coverage.
We have about 4 minutes left, and just to recap, and by the way, the Green Party was putting a lot of faith in Matt Richter in Parry Sound Muskoka, and unfortunately he came second by less than 2,000, fewer than, pardon me, grammar, English teachers. He came second by fewer than 2,000 votes, and there's only 1 or 2 polls left to count in that. We've been watching ridings across the province. So what you've seen tonight, and you can see it on your screen, the Progressive Conservatives are going to form the majority government in the 44th Ontario Parliament. 79, they are elected or leading. They are not actually elected yet in 63 seats to formally form a majority, but they are elected or leading. 79 for the PCs, 25 for what will be the official opposition, 14 for the Liberals, a gain of about 5 from the previous, 2 for the Green Party, who held their own, and Bonnie Brady and Haldeman, the Independent, who held her own locally. You can see that Paul Vickers, a newcomer, was elected in a spirited campaign locally. Kimberly Love referenced the popularity of Selden Hicks, and it was probably the closest of the local ridings. Lisa Thompson returned in Huron-Bruce, Jill Dunlop in Simcoe North, and Brian Saunderson in Simcoe Grey by a very, very close margin. If you can do it in like 30 seconds, in a minute, Michael, last word to your people.
Okay, so just take a couple seconds each. Anything you takeaways from tonight?
I'll start.
Chad,
I'll start with a rapid fire. So, PCs get a vote share of 43%. That's about the lowest they were throughout the entire campaign. Typically polled around 47, 48, 49 throughout the campaign. So a tough go to have your lowest polling day on E-Day.
Yep. Chris, if you can be brief this time.
I will attempt. I really think that there is an alternative for our country and for our province. And I just want people to remember, government works for you. Government exists to help you. Government can make your life better. Government can be a part of making this world a better place. It can be active, and we can believe in that again. Bring some idealism back.
Kimberly.
Love to see that the Liberals have gained a couple of seats. I love to see where they're at in the popular vote, hoping that they translate that into more seats the next time round.
And I'm just going to say simply thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you to Chad, Chris, and Kimberly. It's great to be here with them. And I'm Michael Harris. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to throw it back to Dave for some final thoughts as we wrap up here.
Spirited conversation, and it's one of the things I always enjoy coming to Rogers TV to do these for an election at any level of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. And I suspect all 3 of you don't give up your day jobs. I think we'll be back here within the next 4 months federally. I suspect there's a lot that'll go on there. Now the business of government begins. Parties will have to determine what they gained and what they lost and where they go from here. The Progressive Conservatives forming the government of Ontario. Doug Ford will have to select his ministers, form his cabinet, tell us when he is going to resume Parliament. But as anybody will tell you, the work of parliamentarians begins almost right away. When they are not sitting in the legislature, when they are back in their ridings, they are still working, no matter what their political stripe. So we'll be talking about all of that in the days coming forward, find out when the Ontario legislature resumes sitting and new legislation is announced in the province of Ontario. I'm going to ask our producer how we're doing on time. I think that's about it for us. So, thank you, Michael, and your panel. Thank you so very much. It's a conversation that adds to what you've been able to watch here on Rogers TV. On behalf of the panel, on behalf of our camera crew, producers, David Shearman, and other staff, thank you for making all of this what you expect when you watch the local results on Rogers TV, Grey County.
You're listening to Stingray Music. download the free Stingray Music mobile app.